10 years after my family filed me as missing, my father offered me coffee in his own boardroom. He called me Ms. Vale. He smiled like I was a stranger. And he asked me to help save the company he had tried to steal by erasing me. For the first time since the night they sealed me beneath the old greenhouse, I understood the advantage of being a ghost. A ghost can sit across from the people who erased her and listen while they explain exactly how desperate they are. My father, Grant Whitcomb, had always believed he could identify weakness before it entered the room. He built his life on that belief. He could read shipping contracts, port delays, fuel surcharges, insurance exposure, labor disputes, and frightened executives who pretended not to be frightened. But he could not read me. Not anymore. He sat at the head of the long walnut table inside Whitcomb Port Holdings headquarters, with the Baltimore harbor spread behind him in a wall of glass. Cargo cranes moved slowly outside, lifting metal containers off ships with the patient rhythm of machines that did not care about human guilt. My father liked that view. He used to say the harbor reminded people that real power was movement. Goods in. Goods out. Contracts signed. Routes controlled. Nothing sentimental. He had no idea the woman sitting 3 chairs away from him had once stood barefoot in the nursery hallway of his Newport estate, waiting for him to come home from work and kiss her forehead. He had no idea I still remembered the smell of his wool coat in winter. He had no idea I remembered his voice in the dark. Close it. That was all he had said that night. Close it. Not her. Not Clara. Not my daughter. It. But in the boardroom, 10 years later, he looked at me and saw only a potential investor. That was the mistake that made everything possible. My assistant tells me you take coffee black, he said. I do, I replied. My voice did not shake. That was the first victory of the morning. Grant Whitcomb pushed a porcelain cup toward me, the kind with the company crest stamped in dark blue on the side, a lighthouse, 2 crossed anchors, and the words Whitcomb Port Holdings, EST 1918. My grandfather's company. My mother's future. My inheritance. The empire they tried to kill me for. I picked up the cup with my right hand, careful not to let my left hand rest the way it used to on the table when I was a girl. Old habits can betray a person. So can old pain. Across from me sat my stepbrother, Julian Cross, wearing a suit too expensive for his posture. He had grown broader in the shoulders over the decade, but the same impatience lived in his face. Julian had always hated waiting for rooms to respect him. He believed he deserved authority because he wanted it loudly enough. At my father's right side sat Serena Whitcomb, my stepmother, elegant in a pale gray suit and pearl earrings, her hair pinned so smoothly it looked architectural. Serena's face had barely aged. That was the thing about women who survived on image. They maintained the surface as if the surface were the soul. She smiled at me politely. Ms. Vale, we're very grateful Miriam agreed to send someone so familiar with port risk. Miriam. My mentor. My sponsor. My second life. She sends her regards, I said. Serena nodded. Miriam Vale has an excellent reputation. So do you, I said. Her smile warmed slightly. She thought I was flattering her. I was not. I was measuring the distance between her reputation and the documents in my briefcase. Grant leaned back in his chair. We understand Vale Maritime Capital has concerns about exposure in our eastern cold chain routes. That is one way to put it. Julian frowned. Is there another way? I turned toward him. There is usually another way to put things when people prefer not to hear the first one. His eyes narrowed. A small thing. But satisfying. My father's mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. He liked controlled sharpness when he thought it belonged to someone useful. Then please, he said, say it plainly. I opened the folder in front of me. Whitcomb Port Holdings is overleveraged on 3 harbor lease extensions, underinsured on 2 temperature-sensitive freight corridors, exposed through a private guarantee tied to an affiliate company, and facing potential reputational damage through a foundation audit connected to your public partnership network. The room changed temperature. Not visibly. Not to anyone who had not lived in houses where danger moved quietly. But I felt it. Julian glanced at my father. Serena's fingers stilled on her pen. Grant's eyes sharpened. The old man in him recognized a threat before the rest of the room did. "Those are serious claims," he said. "They are serious patterns," I said. "Claims come later." For one brief second, my father looked directly into my eyes. I wondered if blood had memory. I wondered if some buried part of him would feel what sat across from him. But he only saw Ms. Vale. A consultant from Miriam's firm. A woman with dark hair cut shorter than the daughter he remembered, a different accent softened by years overseas, a different name, a different passport history, a different life. I had spent 10 years learning how not to be Clara Whitcomb. And now Clara was the most dangerous thing in the room. Before I was filed as missing, before newspapers called me unstable, before my father told the police I had stolen confidential port contracts and fled with a broker from Lisbon, before my stepmother stood on the front steps of our coastal estate and wept for cameras that should have been searching the greenhouse, I was simply Clara. Clara Whitcomb. Granddaughter of Arthur Whitcomb, the man who built our family company from a local stevedoring operation into a port logistics empire that touched 5 states, 3 international freight alliances, and enough warehouse property to make politicians return calls. We lived outside Newport in a stone house above the water, the kind of house tourists slowed down to admire from the road. It had ivy on the western wall, a conservatory that smelled of lemon trees and wet soil, a carriage house converted into staff offices, a formal dining room no one under 40 should ever be forced to sit in, and a greenhouse at the edge of the lower garden. The greenhouse was old. Older than the renovated kitchen, older than the pool house, older even than my father's favorite wing of the estate. My grandfather had kept it because my mother loved it. My mother, Elise Whitcomb, used to take me there when I was little. She said the rest of the house belonged to the family name, but the greenhouse belonged to living things. She had a way of making the world feel softer without making it smaller. She moved quietly, but not weakly. She noticed everything. Which flowers had turned toward the light? Which staff member looked tired? Which room had gone tense before anyone raised a voice? When I was afraid of storms, she did not tell me to be brave. She told me to listen. "Old houses tell the truth before people do," she would say, kneeling beside me under the greenhouse glass while rain tapped above us. Floorboards, pipes, doors, windows. They all speak when something is wrong. You just have to learn the language. At the time, I thought she meant creaks and leaks. Years later, I realized she meant families. The house had been trying to tell the truth for a long time. My mother heard it first. That was why she died. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. That would have raised questions. Her decline was quiet enough to become believable. Fatigue. Dizziness. Missed dinners. Private doctors. Medication schedules I was too young to understand. My father said she was fragile. Serena said my mother refused to rest. Julian, who was not yet my stepbrother then, was only a boy visiting with Serena, but even he seemed to understand that the house was shifting toward them. I was 13 when my mother died. The death certificate used gentle words. Natural complications. Underlying condition. No suspicious circumstances. People love official language because it gives grief a handrail. I held on to that handrail for years. My grandfather did not. Arthur Whitcomb changed after my mother's funeral. He became quieter, but not softer. He spent more time in his private archive, more time with estate counsel, more time reviewing company structures I did not understand then. He still let me sit in his study while he worked. He still taught me how port leases functioned, why shipping delays could destroy entire grocery chains, why controlling the movement of goods was more powerful than owning the goods themselves. But sometimes I caught him watching my father through doorways. Not with anger. With assessment. That frightened me more. My grandmother Beatrice stayed mostly in the music room after my mother died. She had been a concert pianist when she was young, though by the time I knew her, she mostly played the same fragments over and over. 6 notes from a lullaby my mother had loved. A hymn from her childhood. Part of a Chopin nocturne that always stopped before resolving. She taught me the 6 notes one winter afternoon because she said every family needed a way to find itself in the dark. I remembered that later. When my father married Serena, I was 15. By then, Serena had perfected the art of entering rooms as if she had always belonged in them. She wore cream, gray, navy, and pearls. She said people's names with careful warmth. She touched my shoulder lightly when others were watching and forgot my existence when they were not. Julian moved in with her. He was 18, 3 years older than me, and already convinced the Whitcomb name had made a mistake by not belonging to him from birth. He called me the little heir when no adults were around. At first it sounded like teasing. Then it sharpened. Must be nice, he would say when my grandfather asked me to sit in on a company lunch. Being born near the right old man. Or, dead mothers make everyone sentimental. Once, in the greenhouse, he leaned against a table of seedlings and said, "You know companies need leaders, right? Not girls who cry over plants." I told my father. He said Julian was adjusting. I told Serena. She said boys sometimes expressed insecurity poorly. I told my grandfather. That was the only time someone believed me without asking me to defend my own wound. Arthur Whitcomb looked toward the greenhouse windows and said, "People show you their appetite before they show you their plan." I did not understand. Not yet. By the time I was 19, my grandfather was dead, my grandmother's memory had begun slipping like a tide going out, and the house had reorganized itself around my father's authority. Grant took full control of the company. Serena took control of the estate. Julian took control of every room where my father was not present. I was supposed to be grateful for a bedroom, a trust allowance, a place at the table, a family name. But gratitude is often demanded most loudly by people stealing something quieter from you. I did not know then that my grandfather had changed the company structure before he died. I did not know he had signed a voting trust amendment, not a simple will, not a sentimental letter, but a legal document that placed controlling voting power in escrow until I turned 25. I did not know my father had found out. I did not know Serena had found out after him. I did not know Julian had once said, loud enough for the wrong person to hear, "Dead girls don't inherit companies." I only knew the house felt wrong. And like my mother had taught me, I listened. Doors closed when I came near. Staff changed without explanation. The greenhouse maintenance schedule shifted. The old storm pump under the lower glasshouse, the one that kept rainwater from backing up into the drainage chamber below, began appearing on work orders marked completed when I knew no one had been there. I asked about it once at dinner. My father looked up. "Since when do you read maintenance logs?" "Since they're left on the mudroom desk." Serena smiled. Clara has always liked little systems. Let her feel useful. Julian laughed into his wine. Useful. The word landed softly. Like a cloth over a mirror. The night they erased me began with rain. Not the gentle coastal rain that beads on windows and makes old houses smell like wood smoke. This was heavy weather. Wind off the water. Thunder moving over the estate. Gutters overflowing. Trees bending hard enough to scrape the glass. My father sent me a message just after 9. Come to the greenhouse. We need to discuss Arthur's documents. I stared at the screen for a long time. Arthur's documents. My grandfather's name was the only reason I went. If the message had said company, family, future, or trust, I might have hesitated. But my grandfather had been dead just over a year, and some childish part of me still believed anything tied to him might be safe. I put on a coat and walked out through the lower hall. The house was dark behind me. The greenhouse glowed faintly through rain. Inside, the air was humid, sharp with wet soil and broken leaves. A few panes rattled above me. Water ran down the glass in silver streams. My father stood near the center table. Serena was by the door to the lower storage stairs, holding a flashlight. Julian was behind me. I understood that last part too late. Where are the documents? I asked. My father looked tired. That is the detail that stayed with me. Not furious. Not wild. Not even cruel in the obvious way. Tired. As if I had become an inconvenience he had been forced to solve. You should have let this pass to people who knew what to do with it, he said. With what? Julian moved. Something hard struck the side of my head. The world broke into sound first. Glass. Rain. My own breath. Then darkness. When I woke, I was cold. Not outside cold. Stone cold. Underground cold. My wrists were bound in front of me. Not behind. That detail mattered later because Tomas said it meant they had not intended to leave evidence of a struggle on my shoulders if anyone found me too soon. My mouth was covered. My head rang with pain. Water dripped steadily somewhere nearby. At first, I thought I was in the cellar. Then lightning flashed through a narrow iron grate above me, and I understood. The old storm cistern beneath the greenhouse. It had been built decades earlier to collect overflow from the estate drainage system. My grandfather had decommissioned it when I was little after a worker slipped on the stairs. I remembered him saying the chamber was unsafe. Sealed. Forgotten. Except not forgotten. Not by people who needed a place built to swallow rain. Above me, voices moved through the storm. Julian's voice came first. Pumps off. Serena said, then close it before the path floods. My father said, no mistakes. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The iron cover shifted overhead. Rainwater ran harder through the channel. Then the light narrowed. My last clear thought before the dark closed was not about my father, or Serena, or Julian. It was my mother's voice. Old houses tell the truth before people do. Then the house went silent. I do not know how long I was down there. Memory does not count time cleanly under terror. It stretches some seconds until they feel like rooms and erases others completely. I remember cold water around my ankles. I remember the smell of rust and old leaves. I remember trying to work my hands loose and feeling the skin tear. I remember my lungs tightening, not from being buried in soil, but from panic, damp air, and the horrible knowledge that everyone who could have opened that cover was the reason it had been closed. I passed out at least once. Maybe twice. The next thing I remember is a metallic sound. Not thunder. Not rain. Metal on metal. Then a man's voice cursing softly in Spanish. The grate lifted. Cold air rushed down. A flashlight hit my face. Clara? No one had said my name like that in a long time. Not as accusation. Not as inconvenience. As recognition. Tomas Rivera climbed down into the cistern with a rope around his waist and mud up to his knees. He had worked on the estate when my mother was alive, not as a gardener, though that was what newer staff called him later. Tomas had been the estate steward, the man who knew every pipe, lock, camera, delivery entrance, old storage room, staff schedule, and family habit better than the family itself. My father had fired him after my mother died. Serena said the estate needed fresh staff energy. What she meant was fewer witnesses. Years later, Tomas returned under a contractor's license to service the greenhouse drainage system. No one paid attention to maintenance men. That was their mistake. That night, he had seen the storm pump disabled on a remote alert he was never supposed to still receive. He came because old houses tell the truth to people who keep listening. He cut my wrists free first. Then the tape. Then he told me not to speak, not yet, not until we were away from the lower garden. You are dead to them right now, he whispered. That is the only reason you are alive. I did not understand. He lifted me anyway. The world blurred after that. Mud. Rain. A truck engine. Towels that smelled like oil and cedar. A clinic outside Providence where no one asked the questions they should have asked because Tomas paid cash and said I had been injured during a storm cleanup. He did not take me to the police. I hated him for that at first. I thought he was afraid. Later, I learned he was right. By morning, my father had already told the story. Clara Whitcomb had disappeared overnight. She had stolen confidential port contracts, accessed family accounts, and fled with a Lisbon broker she had met through one of the company's international programs. The police were told I was unstable after my grandfather's death. A private security consultant produced access logs. Serena cried on camera. Julian gave a statement about how worried they had been about Mike's secretive behavior. The story was ugly. It was also useful. It made me look greedy. It made them look betrayed. And most importantly, it made the public stop searching the estate. Tomas showed me the first article from a motel outside Hartford. Whitcomb heiress missing amid corporate document theft. I stared at my own photograph on the screen. 19. Dark hair. Soft face. Still young enough to believe truth mattered by itself. That girl can't come back yet, Tomas said quietly. I looked at him through a haze of pain and medication. She is me. No, he said. She is what they are hunting. Within a week, I was out of the country. Not to vanish into romance. Not to live some glamorous exile. To survive. Lisbon first. Then Rotterdam. Then Geneva. The route was not random. Tomas had old contacts from my grandfather's shipping years. Quiet people. Practical people. People who understood documents, ports, money, and the value of not asking questions before breakfast. My new name was Mara Vale. Miriam Vale gave it to me. Miriam had been a maritime finance executive who owed my grandfather an old debt. She was in her 60s when I met her, tall, severe, silver-haired, and entirely uninterested in comforting lies. Tomas brought me to her office in Lisbon after I could travel without leaning on walls. She looked at my bruised face, my shaking hands, the borrowed clothes, and said, "Do you want justice, or do you want revenge?" I said, "I want them to know I survived." "That is emotion," she said. "Useful for staying alive. Terrible for strategy." I hated her instantly. Then she gave me tea, a room, and the first safe night of sleep I had had since the greenhouse. Miriam did not raise me. I was too old for that. She rebuilt me. She taught me how private companies hide risk inside polite language. How port leases become leverage. How insurance exclusions can reveal fraud faster than accusations. How board members smile until confidence moves, and once confidence moves, power follows. She made me study. Not casually. Brutally. Maritime finance. Corporate governance. Trust structures. Compliance reports. Beneficial ownership. Shell entities. Cold chain logistics. Insurance underwriting. Regulatory triggers. Legal discovery. Shareholder voting procedures. For the first year, I learned because I was afraid. For the next 3, I learned because I was angry. After that, I learned because I understood. Power was not loud. Power was paperwork that arrived before anyone knew they needed a lawyer. The first time I heard the Whitcomb name in a European conference room, I nearly lost control. It was in Rotterdam, during a cold chain logistics seminar where nobody knew who I was. A speaker mentioned Whitcomb Port Holdings as an example of old American port power adapting to modern freight pressure. The room kept moving. Slides changed. People took notes. Coffee cups clicked softly against saucers. And I sat there with my hands folded under the table, trying not to shake while strangers discussed the company my family had tried to kill me for. Miriam noticed. She did not touch my shoulder. She did not ask if I was okay. That was not her way. She slid a blank page across the table and wrote one sentence at the top. Turn pain into format. I stared at it. She leaned close enough that only I could hear her. Anger is easy to dismiss. Documentation is not. That became the first lesson I truly understood. If I ever went back, I could not go back as a wound. I had to go back as a filing. Thomas stayed near enough to keep me from breaking and far enough not to suffocate me. He never told me everything at once. That was one of the things that made me furious with him. He knew more than he said. About my mother. About my grandfather. About why he had watched the estate even after being fired. Whenever I pushed too hard, he gave the same answer. Not yet. I grew to hate those words. Then I grew to understand them. Truth delivered too early can become another injury. So I waited. Waiting became a skill. 10 years passed. Long enough for the world to accept Clara Whitcomb as a scandalous footnote in an old family business story. Long enough for my father to stop glancing over his shoulder. Long enough for Julian to begin calling himself the future of Whitcomb Port Holdings in trade interviews. Long enough for Serena to become chair of the Whitcomb Foundation and build a public image out of charity galas, arts grants, and women's leadership luncheons. Long enough for my grandmother Beatrice to fade so deeply into memory loss that people spoke around her as if she were already half gone. And long enough for me to become the kind of woman my family would invite into a boardroom. Miriam's firm entered Whitcomb Port Holdings through a risk review. Not a hostile move. Not at first. Hostility makes powerful men defensive. Usefulness makes them open the door. Whitcomb had problems by then. Not collapse, not yet, but pressure. Fuel volatility, aging port contracts, labor exposure, insurance costs, and Julian's habit of chasing flashy side ventures to prove he belonged in conversations he had not earned. We offered help. Grant accepted because the company needed capital. Julian accepted because he saw opportunity. Serena accepted because Miriam's name looked respectable beside hers. None of them recognized me. The first meetings were the hardest. Not because I feared exposure. Because I had to sit across from them and be polite. I watched my father ask for my analysis on harbor lease renewals using the same voice he had once used to tell me to stop asking questions about Arthur's documents. I watched Julian explain his vision for next-generation shipping intelligence while misusing 2 terms he clearly learned that morning. I watched Serena praise the Whitcomb Foundation's transparency while my briefcase contained early irregularities from donor accounts tied to her discretionary events. Sometimes, after meetings, I went back to my hotel and stood in the shower until the water ran cold because my body remembered what my face refused to show. That is the part revenge stories often leave out. You do not become fearless because you survive. You become disciplined. Fear still comes. You just stop handing it the steering wheel. The first piece to move was Julian. He wanted legitimacy more than money, though he would never admit that. Money he had lived around. Legitimacy he had never possessed. He was the stepson of a powerful man, the son of an elegant second wife, a tolerated heir with no blood claim to the Whitcomb name. That insecurity made him reckless. Miriam's network introduced him to a private cold chain expansion deal tied to refrigerated port storage in Southeast Asia. On paper, it was promising. In reality, it was a stress test wearing a suit. Julian was not forced to sign anything. No one trapped him with lies. We simply placed a door in front of his ambition and watched him open it. He personally guaranteed a portion of the financing before the internal review was complete. He did it because he wanted to announce success before earning it. Julian's collapse became visible during a Tuesday morning lease review. He arrived 10 minutes late, wearing the same confidence he always wore when he hoped nobody would look too closely. His hair was perfect. His cufflinks were new. His face was gray. Halfway through the meeting, his phone buzzed for the sixth time. Grant finally said, "If you need to take that, take it." Julian smiled too quickly. "It's nothing." Then the phone buzzed again. And again. The room watched him pretend not to panic. When he finally stepped into the hallway, he forgot the conference room door was glass. We could not hear every word. But we saw enough. His hand on the wall. His shoulders dropping. His mouth forming the same phrase twice. Personal guarantee. When he came back, he looked younger somehow. Not innocent. Just exposed. That was the day the board stopped seeing him as the future of Whitcomb Port Holdings and started seeing him as an expensive risk with his father's protection. Julian did what weak men do first. He blamed the terms. Then the analysts. Then the exchange rate. Then a junior counsel. But the signature was his. A signature is a cruel thing. It does not care who you blame. Serena's line cracked next. The Whitcomb Foundation had always been useful to her. It gave her proximity to donors, city leaders, cultural boards, and newspapers that liked photographs of wealthy women standing beside children's art programs. The foundation was not fake. That made the theft worse. Good work had happened through it. Scholarships. Museum programs. Harbor cleanup grants. Medical equipment donations. Real people benefited. That was why Serena's manipulation had survived so long. She had private luxuries inside public generosity. Event expenses. Consultant fees. Travel reimbursements. Donor hospitality. Small adjustments no one questioned because the woman signing them looked like Charity in pearl earrings. We did not accuse her first. We let the audit ask questions. A missing vendor contract. 2 payments to a styling firm listed as outreach strategy. A donor dinner charged twice under 2 different initiatives. A scholarship fund temporarily borrowed against for an emergency gala expense and replaced later from a different account. Individually, each item could be explained. Together, they sang. Serena noticed the music before anyone else. She began cracking at the Harbor Women's Leadership Gala. She was supposed to give a speech about ethical stewardship. That was the official title printed on the program. Ethical stewardship. I almost admired the universe for its timing. She stood under soft gold lighting, wearing pearls and a pale silk blouse, smiling at a room full of donors who still believed she represented generosity. Then a journalist from the nonprofit finance desk raised her hand during the question period. "Mrs. Whitcomb, can you explain why scholarship funds were temporarily moved through a donor hospitality account last spring?" The smile stayed. The eyes changed. That was Serena's gift. Her face could remain elegant while the truth moved underneath it like a crack through ice. "I'm not familiar with that characterization," she said. The journalist did not sit down. "Is it also inaccurate that 2 foundation vendors were registered to addresses connected to private event services used by your family?" For the first time since I had known her, Serena looked toward someone else for rescue. No one moved. Public masks do not usually fall all at once. They slip when the room stops helping you hold them up. Grant was the last and hardest. My father did not chase quick money. He did not panic over reputation. He understood pressure. He had survived markets, strikes, lawsuits, and family deaths without letting his voice rise in public. To move him, I had to move the board. So we became useful to the directors who had begun doubting him. Quietly. Strategically. A risk note here. A shareholder question there. An insurance concern no one had seen. An acquisition opportunity that required cleaner governance. The board did not turn on Grant in a single meeting. Men like my father do not fall in a single meeting. Their authority thins first. People stop nodding automatically. They ask for backup. They request outside review. They say things like best practices when they mean we no longer trust you alone. The first time Grant lost control of a room, it happened quietly. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just one director, a man who had agreed with him for 20 years, asking for independent review. Grant paused. Not because the request was unreasonable. Because in his world, people did not request things after he had already decided. "We have internal counsel for that," he said. The director folded his hands. "With respect, Grant, internal counsel reports to you. That is the concern." No one breathed for a second. Julian looked offended on his behalf. Serena lowered her eyes. Grant smiled. It was the smile he used before punishing someone later. But the room did not soften. That was when I knew the board had shifted. Not enough to remove him yet. Enough to make him feel the floor. Grant noticed. Of course he noticed. But he could not see the source because the source was sitting at his table, drinking his coffee, calling him Mr. Whitcomb, and letting him believe I was only Miriam Vale's sharpest consultant. The strangest return happened not at headquarters, but at the estate. Whitcomb House had not changed as much as I expected. That angered me. The long drive still curved through old oaks toward the stone front. The conservatory glass still caught the afternoon light. The lower garden still fell toward the greenhouse, though the ivy had grown thicker over the old foundation walls. Wealth preserves surfaces very well. It is rotten interiors it struggles to hide. We were there for a private strategy dinner. Grant wanted Miriam's group to see the family's long-term commitment to stewardship. That was how he described bringing investors to the house where he had tried to erase me. Stewardship. My father could make any word kneel. Miriam came with me. So did 2 of her senior partners. Julian was there, restless and overly talkative. Serena moved through the rooms with hostess grace, though the foundation audit had made her eyes harder. My grandmother Beatrice sat near the music room window, wrapped in a blue cardigan, staring toward the bay as if waiting for a ship she could not name. I had not seen her in 10 years. She looked smaller. That was the first thing that hurt. Not confused. Not frail. Smaller. The last time she had held my face in both hands, she had smelled of lavender soap and old sheet music. She had called me Little Compass because I used to draw maps of the house when I was bored. She had forgotten most things now, they said. Names. Dates. Conversations. Sometimes even my father. The staff rolled her into the music room after dinner because Serena said she became calmer near the piano. I should have stayed away. I knew that. But grief is not always strategic. When the others moved to the library for brandy and port route discussion, I slipped toward the music room. Beatrice sat alone beneath a portrait of my grandfather. The piano was open. A lamp glowed beside it. Rain tapped softly at the windows, gentler than the storm in my memory. I stood in the doorway. She did not look at me. Without thinking, I crossed to the piano and pressed 6 notes. My mother's notes. The little pattern she used to play when I was afraid of the dark. The air in the room changed. Beatrice lifted her head. Not quickly. As if something deep inside her had heard its name. I froze with my fingers still on the keys. Her eyes moved from the piano to my face. For a moment, there was no dementia in them. No fog. Only terrible, sudden recognition. Clara, she whispered. The sound cut through 10 years like glass. I went to my knees beside her chair before I could stop myself. Grandmother. Her hands shook as they reached for my face. She touched my cheek, my hair, the line of my jaw, not trusting sight alone. Tears filled her eyes, though I was not sure she understood why. They told me you took papers, she said. Her voice was thin. They told me you ran. I didn't. I knew, she whispered. Not every day. But somewhere. I knew. Footsteps sounded faintly down the hall. I almost pulled away. Beatrice gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Archive, she said. What? Arthur's private archive. Card catalog. Blue drawer. Your mother knew. Her hand trembled as she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and removed a small brass catalog card. Not a key. Not exactly. A stamped metal card, the kind my grandfather used in his private archive system before everything went digital. On it was a number. B17. She pressed it into my palm. Then her expression changed. The recognition receded like a wave pulled back from shore. She looked at me politely, vaguely. You play nicely, she said. I folded my fingers around the card. Thank you. By the time Serena appeared at the doorway, Beatrice was staring at the rain again. Serena looked from my face to the piano. Is everything all right? I stood. Your mother-in-law asked me to play. Serena smiled. How sweet. She gets confused. Yes, I said. Old houses do that. Serena did not understand. That night, after everyone slept, I went to my grandfather's private archive. I knew the house well enough to move without lights. That knowledge should have belonged to a daughter coming home. Instead, it belonged to a ghost trespassing inside her own childhood. The archive was behind the old study, past a narrow hall lined with maritime maps. My grandfather had kept paper because he did not trust systems he could not lock with his own hands. The brass card opened no door. It identified a drawer. Blue drawer. B17. Inside was a sealed legal packet addressed to Whitcomb Estate Council, never filed through the public family office. A second envelope contained my mother's handwriting. A third held a digital dictation device so old I had to search 2 drawers before finding a charging cord. I took all of it. Not to the guest room. Not to my hotel. To Tomas. He was living in Rhode Island again by then, under his own name, in a small house near the water where no one looking for power would think to search. When I arrived near dawn, he opened the door before I knocked. You found it, he said. I held up the packet. You knew? I knew Arthur hid something, he said. Not where. I walked past him into the kitchen and put everything on the table. I need all of it now. Tomas looked older than he had in Lisbon. Guilt ages people differently than time. His shoulders had narrowed. His hand shook slightly when he made coffee. but his eyes were clear. Then sit down, he said. The legal packet was not a will. That would have been easier. It was a voting trust amendment. The kind of document that does not simply leave money to a person. It moves power from one hand to another. My grandfather had transferred controlling voting rights in Whitcomb Port Holdings into a trust mechanism that would activate when I turned 25, or earlier if Grant Whitcomb attempted to alter succession through marriage, guardianship, or removal of direct heirs. Removal of direct heirs. I read that phrase 5 times. My grandfather had not predicted the greenhouse. But he had predicted my father. The amendment named me Clara Elise Whitcomb. It named my mother as interim protector if she lived. If not, it named Beatrice. If Beatrice became incapacitated, it named Independent Estate Council. My father's public control of the company had never been as complete as he believed. He had been living inside borrowed authority. Borrowed authority is still dangerous when no one checks the paperwork. The letter in my mother's handwriting was shorter. Clara, if you are reading this, it means the house has told you something I could not say safely. I stopped there. My vision blurred. Tomas sat across from me and said nothing. I kept reading. My mother had known my father was moving assets, altering access, building a life with Serena before she was gone. She had suspected her care was being controlled in ways that did not match what doctors told her directly. Not a dramatic accusation. Not a complete case. Just notes. Dates. Missing nurse entries. Medication schedule changes she did not authorize. A private doctor whose bills bypassed the family office. A line that made my hand go cold. If anything happens to me, do not let Grant decide what Clara is allowed to know. I put the letter down. The kitchen blurred around me. For 10 years, I had believed the greenhouse was the beginning of my family's violence. It was not. It was the second act. My mother knew, I said. Tomas nodded slowly. I tried to help her. The words were quiet. Too quiet. I looked at him. What were you to her? His face changed. Not with shame. With grief that had been disciplined for 20 years. I loved her, he said. 3 words. No defense. No decoration. I never dishonored her, he added. I never asked her for anything. But I loved her. And she trusted me before she understood she could not trust her husband. I did not know what to do with that. The child in me wanted to reject it. The adult in me understood that love can exist quietly beside loyalty without becoming betrayal. She was being isolated, Tomas continued. Your father controlled the doctors. Serena controlled the house. I saw changes in the care notes. I made copies of what I could. Arthur began asking questions. Then your mother was gone. Then I was dismissed. Why didn't you go to the police? With what? His voice broke. Missing notes? A dead woman's suspicion? A steward accused of obsession with his employer's wife? Grant would have buried me too, just differently. I looked at the documents on the table. He buried her in paperwork. Yes. And me in a missing persons report. Tomas closed his eyes. I failed her. I thought of him climbing into the cistern in the storm. No, I said. You didn't fail me. He opened his eyes. That is not the same comfort. No. It was not. By sunrise, revenge had changed shape. I had come back to punish them for erasing me. I had not known they erased me because I was already the owner. That truth did not make me feel powerful at first. It made me feel sick. Because it meant my life, my mother's life, my grandfather's final years, my grandmother's confusion, Tomas's exile, all of it had been shaped by the same appetite. Control. My father once said control was what kept a family safe. He had mistaken control for safety. I had come back to show him what control costs. The final meeting was scheduled as an emergency shareholder review. That was Miriam's idea. Never make a personal accusation in a room built for emotion, she told me. Make a legal declaration in a room built for procedure. So we did. The agenda was clean. Whitcomb Port Holdings, strategic restructuring, governance review, risk stabilization. Grant believed the meeting was about saving his company. Julian believed it was about restructuring his debt exposure. Serena believed it was about containing reputational harm before the foundation audit became public. The board believed it was about whether Vale Maritime Capital would inject enough financing to steady the company. Only 4 people knew what the meeting really was. Miriam, Tomas, Estate Council, and me. The morning of the review, I wore a charcoal suit and no jewelry except my mother's small gold ring on a chain under my blouse. It had been in the archive packet. I did not wear it visibly. Not yet. The boardroom filled slowly. Directors first. Outside counsel. Insurance representatives. Foundation auditors. Grant at the head of the table, though not for much longer. Serena to his right. Julian to his left, pale from weeks of financial pressure. Miriam sat beside me, calm as winter water. My father opened the meeting. Before we begin, I want to say that Whitcomb Port Holdings has weathered difficult cycles before. Speculation about governance weakness is premature. This company has always survived because the family remains aligned. Aligned. The word nearly made me smile. My family had been aligned once. Around a locked cistern. Miriam spoke after him. She walked the room through port lease exposure, insurance risks, debt pressure, and board confidence. She did it with the surgical politeness of a woman who had ruined better men before lunch. Then she turned to me. Ms. Vale will present the ownership risk issue. Grant frowned. Ownership risk? I stood. For a moment, every sound sharpened. The harbor cranes outside. The HVAC. Julian tapping his pen. Serena's bracelet shifting against the table. My father breathing through his nose the way he did when patience became effort. I connected my laptop to the screen. I did not begin with the footage. Footage makes people emotional. Documents make them trapped. So I began with the trust. The first slide was not a video. Not a photograph. A document. Voting Trust Amendment, Arthur Whitcomb, notarized and witnessed. Grant stared at it. I watched his face carefully. Recognition did not come all at once. It came in layers. First annoyance. Then confusion. Then memory. Then fear. This document is not part of current corporate governance, he said. Estate Counsel, Mr. Halden, rose from the far side of the table. It is now. Grant turned toward him. You have no authority to introduce, I represent the trust named in this amendment, Halden said. The amendment was executed validly and preserved under private estate instruction due to suspected interference in succession. The room shifted. Board members looked at one another. Julian leaned forward. What trust? Miriam spoke calmly. The trust holding controlling voting rights for Whitcomb Port Holdings. That's impossible, Grant said. I looked at him. You've used that word before when things were simply inconvenient. His eyes snapped to me. For 1 second, something moved there. Not recognition. Instinct. The body hearing an old voice before the mind can name it. I clicked to the next slide. Beneficiary, Clara Elise Whitcomb. Serena made a sound so small most people missed it. I did not. Grant stood. Clara Whitcomb is missing and legally presumed alive, Halden said. The word fell with the weight of a gavel. Grant froze. Halden continued. A court filing has been prepared with identity verification, survival evidence, and supporting affidavits. Pending final judicial confirmation, the trust protector has authorized provisional recognition for board purposes. Julian laughed once. A terrible sound. Are you saying someone found Clara? No, I said. I reached up and unclasped the chain from under my collar. My mother's ring caught the boardroom light. I found myself. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Institutional silence. The kind that enters a room when everyone realizes the agenda was a trap. My father stared at me. His mouth opened slightly. I saw him trying to fit my face over the one he had buried in his mind. Dark hair. Different cut. Older. Sharper. Still mine. Clara, he whispered. The name did not sound like love. It sounded like a locked door opening behind him. Julian stood so quickly his chair hit the wall. No. No, this is insane. Serena's face had gone smooth. That was how I knew she was terrified. My father's voice returned harder. This is fraud. This woman is not my daughter. I clicked again. Identity verification. Dental records. Childhood school records. Private family DNA confirmation obtained through Beatrice Whitcomb's medical guardianship records and court-approved sealed process. Estate archive correspondence. Tomas Rivera affidavit. Grant looked at the final name. Tomas, he said. The door opened. Tomas Rivera entered with 2 investigators and a woman from the state attorney's office. He did not look at my father first. He looked at me. Then he nodded. I nodded back. Miriam stayed seated. That was the thing about real power. It did not need to stand when the room was already moving. Grant slammed his hand on the table. This is a corporate meeting, not a circus. No, I said. It's both less forgiving and more documented than a circus. I clicked to the next file. Maintenance logs. Then Tomas Rivera's affidavit. Then the care records. Then the foundation audit. Then the board vote procedures. Only after that did I open the storm file. By the time the footage appeared, the room had already lost the ability to call it coincidence. Estate maintenance footage. Not the full storm night first. That would come later. I started with records. Storm pump disabled manually. Maintenance request marked complete before service occurred. Greenhouse lower drainage cover opened. Security camera interruption logged. Backup feed recovered from an old estate server Tomas had maintained without your knowledge. Grant's face changed. For the first time in my life, I saw the exact moment my father understood that the house had remembered him. Old houses tell the truth before people do. My mother had been right. The next slide showed still frames from the storm. Grainy. Obstructed. Enough. 3 figures near the greenhouse service stairs. Julian's build. Serena's coat. My father's flashlight. I did not play the audio. Not yet. I did not need to. Julian began talking first. That doesn't prove anything. His voice was too loud. It was a storm. We were checking damage. Everyone knew the pump was failing. Tomas spoke. The pump was disabled. Julian rounded on him. You were fired. And rehired by your mother under a contractor account she forgot to audit. Serena closed her eyes. Small mistakes sink elegant criminals. The state attorney's representative opened a folder. Mr. Cross, investigators also have recovered communications related to the missing person report, private security invoices, and access log alterations submitted the morning after Clara Whitcomb disappeared. Julian sat down. Not because he wanted to. Because his legs seemed to lose conviction. Grant pointed at Mr. Halden. You work for this family. The old attorney looked at him calmly. No, Grant. That was always your mistake. He placed one hand on the trust packet. I work for the trust. That was the moment my father understood he had lost more than a room. He had lost the rules. I clicked to the next slide. Whitcomb Foundation preliminary audit. Serena opened her eyes. No, she said quietly. Yes, I said. The room reviewed donor fund irregularities, discretionary event spending, scholarship timing gaps, and payments routed through consulting accounts tied to Serena's private social events. Serena's public mask did not shatter. It peeled. Layer by layer. She looked at the board, then at the investigators, then at me. You have no idea what I did to keep this family standing. That almost made me angry. Almost. Then I remembered something Miriam once told me: when people claim survival as an excuse for theft, ask who they made pay for it. You kept the family image standing, I said. There's a difference. Julian pointed at me. You did this. The investment. The guarantee. That was you. No, I said. The door was mine. The signature was yours. Miriam leaned back slightly. I could feel her approval without looking. Grant remained standing at the head of the table. He had not moved since the maintenance footage appeared. My father had spent his life believing that control meant he would always be the one asking questions. Now everyone had questions for him. Mr. Halden cleared his throat. Under the Voting Trust Amendment, and pending court recognition of Clara Whitcomb's status, the independent trust protector is exercising emergency voting authority. A motion has been prepared to suspend Grant Whitcomb from executive control during investigation, remove Julian Cross from all operational authority, and appoint interim governance under board supervision. No, Grant said. One word. The word of a man who still thought refusal could be infrastructure. The board voted. Not unanimously. Nothing human ever is. But enough. Enough to remove him. Enough to freeze Julian's access. Enough to refer Serena's foundation materials. Enough to place the company under a governance structure my father could not command. Grant sat down slowly. He looked older suddenly. Not in a satisfying way. In a real one. For a second, I saw the man I had once waited for in hallways. The father whose approval I had wanted. The voice I had believed could protect me if only I could reach it through the coldness. Then he looked at me and said, "You're destroying your own family." And whatever child remained inside me took one final step back. No, I said. I'm correcting the filing error. His face hardened. I am your father. You were my father when you signed the missing person report. He flinched. That was enough. Not justice. But enough. The investigators moved in after the board vote. Not with sirens. Not with dramatic shouting. Real consequences are often quieter than people imagine. Phones collected. Documents requested. Counsel present. Serena demanding a private call. Julian asking if he needed an attorney while already knowing the answer. My father did not move when they asked him to stand. He looked at me instead. Clara, he said. This time, he tried to put softness in it. Too late. I had spent 10 years learning the difference between softness and love. He said, please. That word might have undone me once. When I was 19, maybe. When I still thought a father asking instead of ordering meant he had found his heart. Now it only sounded like a man reaching for the last tool in an empty drawer. I stepped closer to the table. Not close enough for him to touch me. You taught the world I ran away with stolen documents, I said. So I came back with better ones. Serena began crying then. Julian cursed under his breath. My father stared at me as if hatred might restore his authority. It did not. The state attorney's representative asked him again to stand. This time, he did. As they led them out, the harbor continued moving beyond the glass. Containers lifted. Ships loaded. The world that my family had believed they owned did not pause for their downfall. That felt right. After the meeting, I did not go to the estate immediately. Everyone expected me to. Reporters, when the story began leaking in controlled pieces, called it my return home. They loved that phrase. Return home. As if home had been waiting with the porch light on. As if a house that hid your erasure automatically becomes yours again when the paperwork changes. I went to Tomas's house instead. Miriam came later with food neither of us ate. Tomas made coffee. We sat in the kitchen while the news began its slow public turn. Whitcomb heiress found alive. Governance crisis at Whitcomb Port Holdings. Foundation audit expands. Former executives suspended during investigation. They did not get the whole story at once. That was deliberate. Truth, if released carelessly, becomes entertainment. I wanted consequence. Over the next weeks, the legal machinery moved. My identity was confirmed. The trust amendment was reviewed. My grandfather's estate counsel testified. Beatrice's sealed statement, recorded years earlier during a lucid period none of us knew about, confirmed Arthur's concerns about Grant's control. My mother's care records were reopened. That part hurt most. Not because it was surprising anymore, but because official language returned to the place where love had once lived. Medication discrepancies. Unexplained schedule alterations. Missing nurse notes. Privately retained physician. Accelerated certification. No one used the word murder casually. Lawyers rarely do. But they did use words that mattered. Suspicious. Material. Actionable. Reopened. Sometimes justice begins as vocabulary. My grandmother Beatrice died 6 months after the board meeting. She had one more lucid afternoon before the end. I sat beside her bed at the estate, though by then it was legally under controlled management and felt less haunted than emptied. She looked toward me and smiled faintly. Little compass, she said. I took her hand. I'm here. Did the house tell you? Yes. Good, she whispered. Your mother always listened better than the rest of us. Then she slept. That was the last full sentence she ever said to me. I kept the estate, but I did not move back into it. People had opinions about that. They always do. Some said I should reclaim it publicly. Some said I should sell it and be done. Some said it was my legacy. Some said it was tainted. The truth was simpler. I was not interested in performing victory inside rooms where I had once learned fear. So I turned the greenhouse into an archive and legal research center for families challenging estate fraud, elder exploitation, and inheritance abuse. Miriam called it sentimental. Tomas cried when he saw the new glass installed. I named it the Elise Whitcomb Center, after my mother. The old storm cistern was sealed permanently. Not hidden. Marked. Documented. No pretending. That mattered to me. Families like mine survive by making evidence look impolite. I had no intention of being polite. Whitcomb Port Holdings survived too. Not unchanged. Better. Smaller in some ways. Cleaner in others. The board appointed an interim CEO. I took the voting position my grandfather had intended, but I did not pretend blood made me qualified to run every dock, contract, and corridor. Power without humility had already cost my family enough. Julian's debts became legal problems. Serena's foundation life ended in hearings and settlements. Grant fought longer than the others. Of course he did. Control was the last language he had left. But courtrooms are not dining rooms, and judges are less impressed by family names than dinner guests. The official record changed slowly. Clara Whitcomb had not stolen port contracts. Clara Whitcomb had not fled with a broker. Clara Whitcomb had been the victim of a coordinated cover-up tied to succession, corporate control, and estate fraud. I read the corrected filing alone in my office. Not because I had no one. Because some moments are too old to share. For 10 years, my name had been a lie other people told. Seeing it corrected did not make me cry. It made me breathe differently. That surprised me. I had imagined triumph louder. I had imagined confronting my father would feel like fire. I had imagined the room gasping, him breaking, Serena exposed, Julian ruined, the board turning, the truth roaring. Some of that happened. But the part that stayed with me was quieter. My father offering coffee to a ghost. My grandmother recognizing 6 notes. Tomas saying he had not failed me. My mother's letter telling me the house would speak if I learned to listen. And one line in my grandfather's trust amendment. Removal of direct heirs. He had seen the danger before I did. He had built a door into the wall. It took me 10 years to find it. On the first anniversary of the board meeting, I went back to the greenhouse alone. The new glass caught the morning light. The floors were clean. The lower entrance was sealed behind a bronze marker with no dramatic language, only dates and a note that the space had been preserved as part of the estate record. I stood there for a long time. Not as Clara the missing girl. Not as Mara Vale, the consultant who learned to weaponize patience. Not as the heir. Just myself. A woman who had been erased and returned with documentation. The house was quiet. But not silent. Rain began softly against the glass. For years, I thought survival meant outrunning the night they locked me below. Then I thought justice meant making them pay for it. Now I think survival is something less cinematic and more difficult. It is letting your name belong to you again. It is refusing to let the people who harmed you remain the authors of your life. It is understanding that the truth does not need to arrive loud to arrive permanently. For 10 years, I thought I needed them to confess. I did not. Confession is what guilty people give when they want mercy. Records are what survivors keep when they want the truth to outlive fear. My family buried my name. They did not bury the paper trail.